Hi everyone, Mr. Fitz here. Welcome to today's flipped classroom on Alexander the Great. All right, here's your objective. I want you to understand how Alexander the Great was able to spread Greek culture throughout the known world and why. It all starts with his father. His father, Philip II, ruled Macedonia, which is the area to the north of Greece, from about 359 to 336 BC, and transformed it into a powerful military machine. He moved into northern Greece, and he met little resistance because this is not long after the Peloponnesian War. Remember, during the Peloponnesian War, Sparta and Athens were fighting, and they weakened each other greatly. By 338, he had Greece completely under his control. There's a picture of Macedonia. There's a map, and there's Macedonia at the top. Down here is Sparta, and over here is Athens, so you can see in relation to everything that we've been studying, Troy would have been right over here. Now, Philip intended to use Greece as a launching pad to invade Persia. Remember, Persia's over here, the Persian Empire. He wanted to use this as a launching pad across the Aegean Sea to Persia. All right, but he was assassinated before he could begin his plan. So this leaves everything to his son, Alexander, who at the time was just 20 years old. Now, when Philip was assassinated, there were all kinds of thoughts and plots who did it. Some people thought it was one of Philip's wives. Philip was married a few times, and one of his wives was Olympia, Alexander's mom. Now, she was a little bit of a sorceress, a little bit of an odd duck, so to speak. She was often seen with a big snake around her neck, and the snake was usually the representation of Zeus. So some claim that Alexander is the son of Zeus, that perhaps Philip had nothing to do with it. Some said that Olympia wanted Philip killed so that Alexander could inherit the throne. Alexander would become king. Alexander had other wives, and he had recently had another son. So she thought maybe that the heir to the throne would be this other son and not Alexander. Who knows? Who knows? Philip was killed. He was murdered. We don't really know why. Everything's just speculation. But anyway, warfare in the age of Alexander. All right, remember the phalanx. We talked about this before. It was a formation of infantry carrying overlapping shields and long spears developed by Philip II and used by Alexander. So you can see the difference here. These huge, long spears instead of just these short swords. I want to show you this little quick video on the spear and how it works.
12 feet of impaling agony.
It was a devastating lance, about 12 feet long, tremendous spear tip. Alexander used it from horseback. So imagine the weight of this massive Z-stone combined with the force of the rider and the speed of the horse, all that focused on this tip.
That's insane.
It's going to defeat armor. It's going to go through guys' bodies.
Now, notice it has two different tips. And why is that?
The butt spike, mainly for counterbalance.
Rashad will plunge the Z-Stone into the carcass of a pig, mirroring the force of Alexander the Great himself.
The reason why we're using pig, because it simulates human flesh, human bone, human muscle very, very well. It's strung up on a zip line. It'll be moving down towards this direction. When you're ready, thrust through the target.
Okay.
Understood?
You're dead pig.
Rashad, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Release the pig!
Now that's bleeding like a stuck pig. Oh, man.
What did it feel like, Rashad?
Man, it felt like I barely even hit the thing.
So if we take a look at your entry wound here, it's beautiful form. It's going right through.
And that blade is so big that anything in its way is just basically kebabbing it through.
Look at the bend in this.
Oh, nice. You know, it just felt so clean and smooth. I didn't even realize that I was even in a pig until it actually hit my hand.
According to these numbers, you were thrusting at roughly 10 feet per second.
It's a good weapon, you know. It goes right through, nice and clean and easy, you know.
So as you can see, that was a pretty nasty weapon. Now I want to take a minute and I want to talk to you about Bucephalus, Alexander's famous horse. And I'm going to read you a story from our blue book. Elias, go and groom the horse one more time. I want him to look wonderful. We will be asking King Philip a very high price for this stallion. I hurried to the stable to collect my grooming supplies. Philonicus was eager to impress the king. This horse was a real prize. King Philip would be proud to have such a strong animal. If Philonicus were able to sell this horse, he would be a wealthy man. I walked the horse into the sunny field. I went over the horse's coat with a stiff brush. His coat was a silky black, and the sunlight made it gleam. On the stallion's forehead was a white mark that looked like a flame. I would miss this horse once he was sold. I spoke softly to him as I brushed his white forehead. I told him that we would travel to the palace later in the day. Philonicus called out to me, "Where are you, Elias?" I brought the horse back around to the stable. Philonicus was waiting for us. "It is time to go. I don't want to be late for our appointment with King Philip." Philonicus was already upon his horse. I tied the lead of the black stallion to Philonicus's horse. Then I followed them to the palace. Along the roads that led to the palace, I noticed a party of wealthy travelers. Horses were carrying beautiful cloth that was used for tents. One of the men in the traveling party was reciting poetry. Another was playing a lute, a small stringed instrument. Slaves followed, carrying their belongings in baskets. They were carrying enough supplies for a short trip. I wondered out loud where they might have been. Philonicus explained that they were most likely on their way home from the games held in Olympia. At the palace, I took a small brush out of my bag to clean up the stallion before we saw the king. I cleaned the dust from his coat and then led the horse to the field behind the stable where King Philip was waiting. The huge building cast a shadow on the field. After the long journey, I was glad to be out of the hot sun. Philonicus was already talking to King Philip and a member of his cavalry. I heard Philonicus mention a price of 13 talents. A talent is a unit of money used in ancient Greece, Rome, and the Middle East. 1 Greek talent was equal to about 58 pounds of a precious metal, such as silver or gold. I was so shocked by the amount that he was asking that I gasped. I looked around quickly to see if anyone noticed. It was my job to stay in the background and not be noticed. The only person who seemed to hear me was Philip's son, Alexander. Alexander looked to be about 13 years old. His skin was fair, but his cheeks were flushed as if he had been running. He looked at me as if he were amused by my slip. I hoped that he would not mention my mistake to Philonicus. I watched Alexander as he walked near his father. Alexander had quite a reputation. He was talented. He could recite poetry, act, play music, and hunt as well as any man in King. He was experienced in matters of diplomacy. Why, at the age of 6, he met with Persian ambassadors when his father was away. His parents were so impressed with his intelligence that they hired Aristotle himself to become the boy's tutor. Aristotle traveled all the way from Athens to become Alexander's teacher. Now, Alexander was a student of politics and philosophy. He was well on his way to becoming a great leader. As I led the stallion to the field, I hoped that Alexander would keep my mistake to himself. Quickly, my concern for myself changed to concern for the horse. The calm, obedient stallion that I knew was now very restless. I had to drag the horse into the field with all my might. It was as if I were leading a wild, untamed horse. The commotion with the stallion drew the attention of King Philip and Philonicus. King Philip sent his best rider to try out the horse. Instead of riding, the horseman was thrown into the air and onto the ground. The horse was getting more and more out of control. The king dismissed Philonicus and our beautiful horse. As we pulled him out of the field, we passed young Alexander. I held my breath, hoping he wouldn't say anything about me to Philonicus. He started to speak, and I was surprised by what he said. Alexander was trying to speak to the king. Even the king's son shouldn't speak directly to the king. It was so unusual, nobody paid attention to him at first. But Alexander became louder and louder until he had everyone's attention. King Philip turned to Alexander. He was clearly offended, yet his son refused to be silent. Finally, Philip agreed to listen. Alexander demanded a chance to ride the horse and keep it for himself. King Philip was trying not to laugh. If the cavalry's best horseman couldn't ride the horse, how could the boy do it? Alexander's answer? If he tried and failed, he would pay the 13 talents himself. This time, I was not the only one to gasp. 13 talents is an enormous amount of silver or gold. Most men can work their whole lives and not have that much money. I was not surprised that the king took him up on the challenge. When Alexander failed at riding the horse, he would learn his place. This would certainly be the last time that he spoke so boldly and rudely to the king. Alexander came over and took the horse's lead. "What is the horse's name?" he asked. "His name is Bucephalus," I replied. Alexander nodded, but did not try to mount him right away. Instead, he led the horse into a different part of the field. He whispered to him the entire time. None of us dared to speak. Was the stallion really returning to his right mind? He seemed quiet. But we held our breath as Alexander climbed onto the horse's back. We were sure that the horse would throw him. I hoped that the king's doctor was nearby. Amazingly enough, the stallion not only allowed Alexander to ride, he seemed to enjoy the exercise. After a short trot around the field, Alexander confidently climbed down and approached the king. "How did you do it?" I asked. Immediately I knew I should not have spoken, but I couldn't help it. Luckily, everyone was asking the same question, and no one noticed that I had spoken out of turn. Alexander explained that he had begun to notice that the horse acted scared as soon as we walked into the shaded area of the field. He had watched the stallion as we approached the palace, and had decided that the horse must be frightened by the shadows. Alexander was able to calm the horse simply by walking him into the sun, where the shadows would be behind him. Once he was out in the sun, the stallion was back to being the horse that I had groomed so carefully this morning. I would miss him, but I knew that Alexander would treat him well. King Philip was beaming with pride. His son had shown himself to be wise beyond his years. Philip then announced that Alexander would have to go out and find a kingdom equal to his worth. Ours was too small for a man as brilliant as Alexander. Okay, I'm at the end of this part of the presentation. I'm going to ask you to stop it here and then click on the next link where I will pick up with a tribute to Bucephalus.